Thank you very much. Thank you to Deborah and Matthew and Tom for the invitation and the introduction. Here to talk about teaching with technology, obviously, and rather than talk about that in the abstract, let me just start by showing you some. So this is the website for Studio 20, which is my home in the journalism department. You might call it the experimental journalism wing. And it is, here is a post that went up recently about our graduates and sort of where they've gone on after they've graduated. But this is also Studio 20. And Tom has already outed me as being pro-cacophony, so you can see where this is going. The students of Studio 20, even though they were working on individual or joint projects, small collaborative projects, decided that the part of the value of the program was being around one another while they were working, was the collegiality of the college. And so they asked permission and then just took over a classroom several evenings a week and opened it up as a co-working space. And they said to anybody in the journalism department, not just Studio 20, come in and work alongside us. Sometimes it was everybody heads down in their laptops working. Sometimes a little conversation would pop up. People would say, hey, do you know how to do this? Oh, I've been thinking about that. And it was the kind of working side by side that characterizes communities of practice. Groups of people who come together to get things done, to get better at what their shared interests are, without all having a shared goal. And this is Studio 20.
Fracking is a form of natural gas drilling, an alternative to oil, because the oil kept spilling, bringing jobs to small towns, so everybody's willing. People turn on the lights and the drillers make a killing.
Water goes into the pipe into the ground. The pressure creates fission 7,000 feet down. The cracks release the gas that powers your town. That well's fracked, yeah, totally fracked. But there's more.
So that is the fracking song, as you see. The fracking song, it's essentially a schoolhouse rock for grown-ups, was a result of the Studio 20 program's work on what are called explainers. That part of the newspaper where it says, you're just coming into the middle of the story, we're going to give you the background. And one of the challenges we presented to the students was design a new explainer. Pick a subject that the American public is likely to care about, but not know the details of, and find some way to get those details across to them without doing the traditional, here's the sidebar that explains everything you don't understand. And so these guys, in the second decade of the 21st century, how would you do it? You'd make a music video. And the experience of making the fracking song was interesting. In fact, one of the students made himself famous among the class by refusing to let the rhymes get better if the science got worse. And so the act of making the fracking song was the act of getting it right on two different dimensions. Is it entertaining to watch? Is it entertaining to listen to? And are we actually explaining the science behind hydraulic fracturing? And this went so well that Time magazine put it on one of their end-of-the-year top 10 lists for creative use of video. So there's a couple of things I want to call your attention to in this way of teaching with technology, in this mix of classroom instruction, after-hours work, and then the production of this fracking song as an explainer video. First of all, the teaching part and the with technology part weren't always in the same place. Right? Technology makes a lot of things better, but here's something it doesn't make better: face-to-face conversation. Right? You may have experienced this in your classrooms if you are in a place where there is Wi-Fi. As the Marines put it, after having years of experience with battlefield technology, virtual presence means actual absence. If you are paying attention to something far away, you are paying less attention to the people you are with. And one of the things we've learned at Studio 20 over time is, when do you say, okay, we are diving into this data set, we are going to pull it apart, we're going to see what people are doing, people down in the laptops, annotating things, working things, and then when to say, okay, lids down, turn your laptops off, turn your machines off, look around the room. Because in a way, the thing we have here that's most precious is the ability to convene these conversations. A related observation is the way that technology and face-to-face communications aren't replacements for one another. You have to figure out how they can mix side by side. We do that in the classroom by sometimes saying, now we are definitely using technology, now you are allowed to use technology, now you are forbidden to use technology. But the students also recognize that one of the principal values of being at NYU is being around other people. Everyone in that room I showed you could have been at home doing that same work, but they wouldn't have been learning from one another at the same time. And Tom brought this up in the introduction, the idea that the lateral learning, the peer-to-peer learning, is a big part of the value that technology can bring to the equation. It's not all just solo use. We've always had these two images of the academy, right? The scholar working by themselves, alone in a library carrel or alone in their office, and the collegiality that colleges allow for. That's a big part of the hallway conversations and I just ran into someone and they said something interesting to me. And those two facts of academic life have to be preserved, but now they can be rebalanced or imagined in new ways. And you see that when the students say, I would rather drag my laptop down to be around my peers and have that conversation than to go home and work by myself, even though I can. And the third piece that I want to call your attention to here is that the problem we gave the students, and we find this over and over again, and I have to say both at journalism and at ITP up the street where I also am, if you give the students medium-scale problems, they are able to use the technology in much more exploratory and imaginative ways. If we'd said, just do anything, right? Just as long as it's journalism, just knock yourself out, do anything. That's almost a paralyzing degree of freedom, and it's hard to find your way to any particular solution. And if we'd said, go make a song about hydraulic fracturing, it would probably have been less good than when they found their way to it. It's in this ability to frame medium-sized problems, to say the technology is actually allowing a degree of exploratory freedom here, which means we don't have to specify everything at every step, but we can't dump so much freedom into the exploration that it all just ends up being random wandering. Now, this is obviously a special case, right? These are journalism students, these are graduate students, it's specifically an experimental journalism lab. It would work differently in an undergraduate physics course and so on. But of course, every discipline is a special case for some reason, right? Any two disciplines that aren't different from one another aren't different disciplines. So part of our goal as a shared institution, and the pro-cacophony bit alludes to this, is each of us finding out what works in the context of our own departments, our own encounters with students, and the encounters we set up between those students with one another. Right? And this is the last thing I want to say about the fracking song, because in a way it's the most important message. It's the most important thing I've seen and learned in teaching with technology in the now 11 years I've been at NYU. These are not new tools for doing old jobs. It's not, you can't just say, we used to have paper syllabi and now we have Sakai. When you start using Sakai, you do different things and you do them in different ways. So a little bit at a time, as we embark on figuring out where technology fits into what we do, we're transforming the institution we're part of as we go. So here is a story, cautionary, unfortunately not one that took place at NYU, about that fact, about the fact that you can't just integrate technology without also changing the institution that technology integrates in. Starts in 2008 with this guy, Chris Avenir, who was then a freshman at Ryerson University in Canada. And Avenir, in his first semester there, took Chemistry 101. And he discovered, as generations of freshmen have since time immemorial, that Chemistry 101 is really hard. And so he said, I'm not going to get this done on my own. Right? And so he leaves the model of the scholar working by himself, and he goes instead for the collegiate model. He says, I will join a study group, and I will understand Chemistry 101 better. But of course, Avenir is 18 in 2008. His life has tracked the growth of the public internet. The web was around by the time he was 5. Google was around by the time he was 10. Facebook was around by the time he was 15. And before he was 20, he was in college. So where did he join his study group? He joined it, of course, on Facebook. Right? So there they are on Facebook, and they've got this study group, which they call the Dungeon/Chemistry 101 for studying this subject. And all of a sudden, Avenir gets a message from the academic dean. He's being called up on charges. How many charges? 147 separate counts of academic misconduct, 1 for joining this group, and 146 additional counts for every other student who was already a member of the group. Right? And the shock of this, as you might imagine, and this is, I want to emphasize, this young man's first year in college. The shock of this was considerable, not just for Avenir, but around the campus. So here was Ryerson's point of view on this subject. This is a clear-cut case of academic misconduct, right? That is the message, right? So Dean Norrie is operating in the lone scholar model and says, when we see you operating outside that model, you are breaking the rules. To which Avenir himself made this reply. The reason they called their Facebook group The Dungeon is that that was the name of the real room on the Ryerson campus where study groups met, meaning that this wasn't just something the campus tolerated, it was something the college supported. So you can see the dilemma here. There are two models of academic thought, the lone scholar and the collegial group. But we've had the advantage for years and years and decades and centuries of being able to send those messages to different places. Among ourselves, we say, we're here to talk to each other. That's what this is for. We communicate to students that the best kind of class you can sit in is the small seminar where you can speak and listen and converse your way to a deeper understanding of the subject. We say interdepartmental conversations are good. We prize the kind of collaborative work. We look for places where people are bringing different insights from different fields together. And to the outside world, we say we are a quality control factory. We take individual students in, we fill their minds with the knowledge that they need, and we stamp a diploma on their foreheads and ship them off to you. Right? And the nice thing about those two messages in those two forums is they never clashed. We can say one thing to ourselves on the inside and another thing to the outside world because, of course, the messages aren't going to get mixed up. It's not like 18-year-olds are also global publishers, except now it is like that. Now it's exactly like that. Right? So this is the dilemma that Ryerson faced, and it was a clash of metaphors. Dean Norrie said, look, this is just another mimeograph machine. Right? Facebook is just another way for distributing information, and if people are distributing information about Chemistry 101, that is academic cheating. And Avenir says, this is another table. This is just another way of gathering a group of people together to have a conversation. So that's the clash of metaphors. Is Facebook just another replicating technology, now reimagined in the cloud, or is it a communal environment now rendered virtual? And the answer is, that's the wrong question. Because it turns out that what Facebook is really like is not a mimeograph machine or a virtual table. What Facebook is really like is Facebook. Right? It's different from other things. In fact, if it wasn't as different from other existing things, it would not be as important as it has become. And there's no way to pick a previous metaphor that will make Facebook not be weird. It's weird. Facebook is a kind of thing that we haven't had to face before. So, Avenir's point is the message from college is talk to your peers to learn. And if you take Facebook away, you're taking away the primary way people my age talk to our peers. On the other hand, from the Ryerson side, right, a study group with 147 people in it is a different kind of study group than a table with 6 people around it. Because in a table with 6 people around it, if somebody just showed up and said, hey, I actually don't really want to study, can I just copy your guys' answers? The people around that table would say no. It's easy enough to enforce academic discipline in a group of 6. But in a group of 146, you can't enforce that kind of discipline. Large-scale systems on the internet are not free rider resistant. They are free rider tolerant. meaning that a study group that has 146 people in it probably did have students in it who were simply along for the ride. So you can't allow this in an unlimited domain, but you also can't restrict it to nothing. The institution has to adapt, and that adaptation will slowly make us a different kind of institution, in part because we will end up, perforce, hybridizing with things like Facebook. Right? Now, part of the Avenir story, of course, is that Facebook itself triggers such a negative reaction. Ugh, all the gossip, all the drama, all the horror on my wall. Why should I take this seriously? And certainly, right, whenever you look around the internet, if this is what you're looking for, you can find loads of examples of deeply unserious work, right? And so you see, these are lolcats, of course, which are cute pictures of cats made cuter with the addition of cute captions. This is my favorite. You look at this and you say, this is the thing you think is going to transform academic life? The thing with the cats? Like, is that? But here's the thing. That always happens. And I don't mean it always happens with the web. I mean this always happens with media. Right? It did not take long after the invention of the printing press for people to start producing erotic novels. It did not take long for someone who owned a printing press and needed to recoup their money to say, hey, you know what I bet people would pay for? Right? It took another 150 years for anybody to even think of the scientific journal. Right? And so we as academics cannot say, well, when that thing gets serious, then I will use it. We're the people who have to figure out how to make it serious. It's what we did with the printing press. It's what we've got to do with these digital tools. It wasn't like someone looked at the printing press and said, we could actually use this to build peer review. That took a long time, that conversation. And it was one of the most important conversations in the history of the academy, and especially, obviously, in the history of the sciences. But it wasn't automatic. It wasn't a side effect of the technology. We got erotic novels because we're the kind of people we are, and the printing press is the kind of tool it is. But making this work for science took concerted effort. We get lolcats because we're the kind of people we are, and the web is the kind of medium it is. But it is going to take our concerted effort to figure out where, in addition, we can press these tools into the kind of mission we have in the academy. So this is something I want to emphasize because it is, I think, again, the core intuition here, which is that when you use these tools, new things become possible. That's what technology does. But those new things operate in a way that is so different from the way we've typically done it in the academy that we end up restructuring what we do, and then, if we do it right, learning from the restructuring. So Stanford has adopted what I think is the most remarkable set of experiments in higher education, which is that they have started having open classes, and I mean open to anyone in the world. Peter Norvig, I am not smart enough to rank the most brilliant computer scientists of my generation, but he is in anybody's top 10 list. He was chief scientist at Google, if you can imagine that on your business card. Now head of research there. And he is teaching a class, taught last fall, a class at Stanford on artificial intelligence, for which tens of thousands of students enrolled in 190 countries. It was all of the content from Stanford. It was not a Stanford diploma. It was also not a Stanford tuition. But the knowledge was out there. They put out the lectures. They distributed the book. But they didn't provide the other infrastructure. And you know who did? The students. The students went onto Reddit, which is one of the large-scale conversation spaces of the internet, and they created their own what's called a subreddit just for this class. And it was a place where people who were taking the lectures streaming out of Stanford could go and talk to each other. So they created a conversational environment around the class on infrastructure not owned or hosted or even controlled by Stanford. And then they went to Meetup, Scott Heiferman's company down the road here, down on Broadway, which was founded to convince people to walk away from their keyboard for a minute and get together in the real world. Meetup solves the finding people you might like to talk to problem, but then it convinces those people, go down to a restaurant, go down to a coffee shop, go out to a park and have a real conversation. And meetups sprang up all over the world for people to get together and talk about the Stanford course. So here we have delivery of information, solo work, and conversational learning, all taking place, as we would expect it to do in any academic environment, but taking place across 3 different bits of infrastructure with no top-level control. Right? This is the kind of reinvention of the academy going on. Now, in the Stanford case, it is from the inside out. Stanford has said, we can do this. We can essentially film our lectures and distribute our books at high enough volume that it's worth it to us to do it simply because it makes the world aware of this. And there is some competition with MIT and their open courseware models going on as well. This is certainly not pure altruism on Stanford's part. But it is very much a gift to the world, nevertheless. There's also experiments going on outside in. And if I could give you any piece of advice about figuring out teaching with technology, it would be to pay attention to the people who are teaching with technology but are not us. They are not academics. They are not in an institution. Right? If you go to Codecademy, again, an amazing part of the new New York tech cluster, also down the road, about 2 blocks away from Heiferman's shop. Codecademy, which I've put the slide too high so you can't see the top of it, but Codecademy is a login and learn to program JavaScript anywhere, if you have a web browser, for free. Right? They've only been going since August. They have already started something called Code Year, which once a week sends you structured lessons, so that at the beginning you'll be typing the famous first computer program, Hello World, and by the end you will be programming a game in JavaScript. This is teaching from the outside in. These people are not academics, but they care about the same kinds of things we care about. Howard Rheingold, who's also affiliated with Stanford, has started Rheingold University, right? Reminiscent of the days of Oxford and Cambridge when scholars would stand outside the classroom hawking their individual classes and asking students to sign up one at a time. Howard has just set up shop on the web and said, you could come here and study with me. And Keo Stark, one of our instructors at ITP, proposed writing a book called Don't Go Back to School, saying to people who'd gotten an undergraduate degree, by and large, you don't need to go back to graduate school because there are lots and lots of ways to learn the thing you care about. So that in itself is a sign of what's possible. But this example isn't just about content, it's also about form. Keo had this idea for a book, and then she didn't have to go around and convince publishers to buy it. She did it on Kickstarter, which is a platform where she could go directly to her potential audience. And she asked for $14,000, which would be a moderately good advance for a first-time author of a nonfiction book in New York publishing terms. But she got almost 40. She got 1,500 people to kick in about $25 each, and now she's doing this project. This is what's beginning to be possible, the idea that you can treat the world as a potential platform, both for output and for input. And that should be of enormous interest to us here. Now that the sun never sets on the NYU empire, we have to get good. No, seriously, right? We have to get good at thinking about global scale. One of the things we're thinking about in the journalism department is, could you create a 24-hour news feed, right, produced by 6 teams working only 5 hours each, 2 in New York, 2 in Shanghai, 2 in Abu Dhabi, hand off to the 2 in New York again. And all of a sudden, with a small number of people, you can start to create an absolutely persistent resource once you realize that we don't just have a lot of students in a lot of places, but that we really have someone awake and thinking 24 hours a day. Right? What are the ways to use those resources? So let me tell you, before I go to the last example I want to use, let me tell you, I think, the classic mistake that we need to avoid in thinking about these tools. And this is a little story that doesn't have a visual representation, but it is, I think, in a way, the founding story of digital technology. When the internet launched, late 60s and early 70s, it was designed to have two applications. There was Telnet, which was remote access to other machines. The idea was you could get access to a computer on someone else's campus, and you could run a piece of software that they had there. Because God knows computers were so expensive, you were never going to get one on your own campus. And FTP, File Transfer Protocol, which was if there was a document on a remote computer, you can get that document and you can download it. And in the late 60s, 1969, the internet worked. Right? They finally got the thing up and running, and it started to grow. And by the early 70s, what was really apparent is that no one cared. It didn't actually work very well, and you don't hear this in the triumphalist stories about the history of the internet. But it didn't actually work very well. Not because the technology didn't work, but because people actually didn't care about remote access to computers, and they didn't care about remote access to the files. Those weren't the things that motivated anybody but, alas, computer scientists to use the tool. And then in the early 70s, a guy named Ray Tomlinson ported a tool from a system they had at MIT. He took a little piece of software they had up there and he ported it to the internet. It was called electronic mail. And it was essentially a special form of FTP where you could transfer a file a bit at a time and it would show up as a message on someone else's computer. And within 3 months, email made up 75% of the internet's backbone traffic. Right? The killer app turned out to be not the thing they'd planned to do, but the accidental attempt to try something new. And what we learned from email is that the most valuable thing connected to another computer isn't the applications, and it isn't the file system. It's the user. Right? Whenever digital technologies are involved, we have historically and systematically overemphasized access to information, and we've underemphasized access to each other as the principal value of the tool. But what we see over and over again in the experiments that are working is that the collaborative piece, the information sharing piece, the peer-to-peer learning piece is a big part of this. And when I say collaborative, I mean really big collaborative. This is Tim Gower's weblog. Tim Gower's, a couple of years ago, put up a post. He's a field medal level mathematician. Put up a post saying, is massively collaborative mathematics possible? And he asked himself in this now famous post, could you do mathematics a new way? Could you get out of the model of the lone mathematician working by themselves? And could you say, emphasis mine, that anybody who had anything whatsoever to say about the problem could chip in? On the idea that even incorrect characterizations might spur some kind of new thinking. And the incredible thing about this experiment is that it worked. It wasn't that it worked because people worked it out over years and years. Almost immediately, mathematicians understood the value of this. They started the Polymath blog, and they took on a variety of problems they thought might be tractable, including this, my favorite, Polymath 4. It's a method of finding primes. It's not my favorite because I understand the math. I am not a PhD-level mathematician. It's my favorite because it was good enough to submit for review to a journal. And they worked through the problem exactly as Gowers had said. They went through and they said, well, here's some ways to take it on. What can we do? Here are the things that have been tried. And a lot of overlapping partial observations turned into a sense among the assembled community that this was a good solution to the problem. This was mathematical collaboration on a scale that had never been seen before. So they submitted this to the Mathematics of Computation, a journal from the American Mathematics Society. And here's the note they got back. So how's that for adding value, right? We like this, we want to publish it, but maybe put a space in runtime. And then my favorite bit. Finally, the paper does not say clearly who the authors are, right? Clearly, the reviewer is unable to imagine that this is anything but an oversight, right? In fact, the paper does not say clearly who the authors are because it is not clear who the authors are. right? And so the people over at Polymath, well, we want to get this published. What do? So they do this. Then there's the usual problem. They're already used to this of trying to decide who's a main participant. So they just make something up. Not because it's true, but because they won't get into the journal unless they do it the old way. So when I say these tools change the institution, this is what I'm talking about. Consider what happened in the 1600s when the Philosophical Transactions, the first academic journal in English, started publishing. The journal had become a method for increasing the quality and the speed and the scale of the dissemination of academic research. What has happened to journals now? They are now in the business of restricting the spread of information. Right? The security cordon at Bopst around the electronic documents costs more than the servers that would make those documents accessible. We spend, at Reed Elsevier's request, more money trying to prevent people from reading things than we do in allowing people to read things. As you will understand if you have ever tried to log in and get a document that your institution has paid for, maybe twice if the research has come from NYU, and you can't get to it because you're not on the network. Right? So the academic journal, which has been a centerpiece of academic life, has had its role transformed because of the change in what's possible given these new tools. And the Journal of Mathematics and Computation, right? They are no longer in the business of vetting and then publishing the results. That's already been done by the relevant community of mathematicians on Polymath, right? They may as well change their name to the Journal of Ike and Has Tenure for all the value they add, right? The journal has now become a post hoc rubber stamp. So these transformations are already going on. Massive scale collaboration in the academic environment is already going on, and it is outrunning the ability of the traditional institutions to host the value we are accustomed to hosting. We ought not assume that we can just keep doing business the way we've been doing, but now while sprinkling some digital tools on it. These tools actually allow us to rethink from our core values, peer review, honesty in describing the methods, collegial conversations, wide broadcast of the results, in ways that are very different than we did even 10 years ago. So let me end with one last story. This is from Studio 20. This is a transcript of one of the debates, one of the many, now 21 Republican debates. And over at Studio 20, Jay Rosen, my colleague and the founder and leader of the Studio 20 effort, said, you know, there's a lot of embedded information in there, not in the candidates' answers, but in the press's questions. How can we figure out what it is the press as a whole cares about across these 21 debates? So someone sat down and said, well, we're going to copy this into an Excel spreadsheet, and then we're going to, study the results. Took 3 hours to cut and paste and get the Excel formatting right here. So then, a group of us who understood how to do this whipped up a little Python script, a simple programming language, in this case for manipulating text, and we automatically generated those those documents. We took the transcripts and we turned them into Excel with 15 lines of Python. And then the students uploaded it to Google Docs, and they went through and they annotated them like crazy. I don't know if you can see all the way on the far side there. 3 students read every question, and for each question they characterized what it was about. And once we'd taken that information, already widely available in the outside world, and we'd made it accessible here, you could find all kinds of interesting things. For instance, there were 21 questions asked about what have classically been thought of as women's issues in the debates. 20 of them were about abortion. Right? There were 3 times as many questions asked about the moon as about the earth, and so on. And this then gets featured on The Guardian, our partner who liked this research well enough that they published it not as, oh, here's this little side thing we're doing as an experiment with NYU. They just published this, and they gave Studio 20 a byline. Right? And the students' data became the core of the publication. Right? So how did this work? How did a group of graduate students, using no fancy technology, right, a free scripting language in Google Docs, right, how did they do something that a professional newsroom said, this is not only worth publishing, this is worth giving a group byline to? And the answer is we relied on the advantages we always have in the academy. We have the advantage of time, we have the advantage of multiple perspectives, and we have the advantage of being able to rethink things from first principles. And that's where we are now. We're having to turn those capabilities in on ourselves. As we think about teaching with technology, we're having to ask ourselves not just, how can I get an electronic version of a syllabus? Can I make an iPad behave like a book? We're having to ask ourselves, if I adopt this tool, what new characteristics is this going to bring into my discipline? And what challenges is it going to create for me and for the institution? And it's only in grappling with that, it's only in looking at ourselves as an institution and thinking through those problems that we're going to get this right. Thank you very much.